Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. I'm your host, Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on general knowledge. Let's take a look at our Quiz Class awards. Let us know how you rank in the comments at the end, along with the answer to the bonus question. So let's begin. Which Soviet chess legend was defeated by Bobby Fischer in the 1972 match of the century? Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov, or Boris Spassky? Boris Spassky. What was the 1919 baseball scandal in which players were accused of throwing the World Series? The Pete Rose scandal, Pine Tar incident, or the Black Sox scandal? Black Sox scandal. What 1963 earthquake leveled parts of a city in Yugoslavia? The Skopje earthquake, the Sarajevo tremor, or the Balkan earthquake? The Skopje earthquake. Which 1953 natural disaster killed over 2,500 people in the Netherlands? The Zeebrugge flood, the North Sea flood, or the Rotterdam surge? The North Sea flood. Who voiced the original Snow White in the 1937 Disney film? Judy Garland, Marni Nixon, or Adriana Caselotti? Adriana Caselotti. Which architect designed the Guggenheim Museum in New York City? Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright, or Le Corbusier? Frank Lloyd Wright. Who was known as the Queen of Gospel and performed at Carnegie Hall in 1950? Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Mahalia Jackson, or Aretha Franklin? Mahalia Jackson. Which 1941 vehicle was originally designed for military use but became popular among civilians? Jeep, Land Rover, or Humvee? The Jeep. Which marine creature's songs were first recorded and studied by scientists in the 1970s? Humpback whale, orca, or dolphin? Humpback whale. Which 1974 film was a satirical western that became an unexpected box office hit? Silverado, The Wild Bunch, or Blazing Saddles? Blazing Saddles. Which country dominated international table tennis in the 1960s? China, Japan, or South Korea? China. What genre did Jamaican musician Jimmy Cliff help popularize internationally in the 1970s? Ska, soca, or reggae? Reggae. What was the name of the singer who ran for the mayor of Palm Springs and won in 1988? Sonny Bono, Tony Curtis, or Bryan Adams? Sonny Bono. Which animated character was the first to receive an honorary Oscar in 1932? Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, or Felix the Cat? Mickey Mouse. Which screenwriter was blacklisted during the Red Scare but won an Oscar under a pseudonym? Elia Kazan, Dalton Trumbo, or Carl Foreman? Dalton Trumbo. Which country started producing the Trabant as a small, low-cost car during the 1950s? West Germany, Hungary, or East Germany? East Germany. Which female American code breaker helped understand Japanese communications during World War II? Anne Cara Christie, Julia Child, or Grace Hopper? Anne Cara Christie. Which East German guard fled to West Germany in 1961 during the Berlin Wall's construction? Klaus Fuchs, Wolfgang Vogel, or Konrad Schumann? Konrad Schumann. Which Canadian hockey player was nicknamed Mr. Hockey? Bobby Orr, Gordie Howe, or Wayne Gretzky? Gordie Howe. Which Beatle controversially said the group was more popular than Jesus in a 1966 interview? George Harrison, Ringo Starr, or John Lennon? John Lennon. Which 1941 U.S. act allowed military aid to Allied nations before entering the war? The Neutrality Act, Lend-Lease Act, or War Powers Act? Lend-Lease Act. Which margarine brand's ads in the 1970s included the phrase, "It's not nice to fool Mother Nature"? Chiffon, Imperial, or Blue Bonnet? Chiffon. Which U.S. senator accidentally drove off a bridge at Chappaquiddick Island in 1969? Hubert Humphrey, Ted Kennedy, or Barry Goldwater? Ted Kennedy. Which island nation banned dogs in 1924 to protect its bird population? Malta, Iceland, or Cyprus? Iceland. Which 1941 animated film was the first ever to be re-released in theaters? Dumbo, Pinocchio, or Snow White? Dumbo. Which U.S. president played football at the University of Michigan and had many offers to go pro? Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, or Ronald Reagan? Gerald Ford. Which singer was known as the Singing Brakeman and was one of country music's first national stars? Roy Acuff, Hank Snow, or Jimmie Rodgers? Jimmie Rodgers. Who hosted the first television talk show in the U.S. in the early 1950s? Jack Parr, Joe Franklin, or Steve Allen? Joe Franklin. Which 1970s sitcom was the first to feature a gay character in a recurring role? Maude, Three's Company, or The Corner Bar? The Corner Bar. Who became the first African American woman to star as a main character in a TV series in the 1960s? Ruby Dee, Diane Carroll, or Nichelle Nichols? Diane Carroll. Which American labor leader's mysterious 1975 disappearance remains unsolved till today? Jimmy Hoffa, Cesar Chavez, or George Meany? Jimmy Hoffa. Which tennis star was called Super Brat during the late 1970s because of his on-court outbursts? Jimmy Connors, Bjorn Borg, or John McEnroe? John McEnroe. Which cookware brand was the first in the world to introduce colorful enameled cast iron? Revereware, Le Creuset, or Pyrex? Le Creuset. What product was popularized in the 1970s with the slogan, Calgon Take Me Away? Shampoo, skin cream, or bubble bath? Bubble bath. Which African country hosted the 1977 Arts and Culture Festival called Festac? Nigeria, Kenya, or Ghana? Nigeria. Which band was banned from the Ed Sullivan Show in the 1960s for not censoring their song lyrics? The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or the Doors? The Doors. In what year did the Sydney Opera House officially open? 1973, 1967, or 1980? 1973. Which country ran dolphin military training programs during the Cold War? Japan, the Soviet Union, or the United States? The Soviet Union. In which decade did Formula One racing first make it mandatory for drivers to wear fireproof suits? The 70s, the 50s, or the 60s? The 1960s. Which U.S. comedian made the phrase, "The devil made me do it," a national catchphrase in the 1970s? Richard Pryor, George Carlin, or Flip Wilson? Flip Wilson. Which famous televangelist pleaded guilty in the 1980s for financial fraud? Jim Bakker, Billy Graham, or Jerry Falwell? Jim Bakker. Which 1960s TV show featured a fictional music band that ended up topping the music charts in real life? The Monkees, the Partridge Family, or the Archies? The Archies. What pet did Salvador Dali walk on a leash in Paris in the 1960s? Cheetah, anteater, or iguana? An anteater. Who won the Miss America crown in 1937? Yolanda Betbez, Betty Cooper, or Phyllis George? Betty Cooper. What was the name of the heiress who participated in an armed robbery after being kidnapped in 1974? Zsa Zsa Gabor, Gloria Vanderbilt, or Patty Hearst? Patty Hearst. What name was given to Italy's rapid economic growth during the 1950s? The Italian economic miracle, Italy's Great Leap, or the New Italy movement? The Italian economic miracle. Which country won the gold medal in men's ice hockey at the 1960 Winter Olympics? The United States, Canada, or the Soviet Union? The United States. Which baseball team was the last to sign African American players? The Chicago Cubs, the Philadelphia Phillies, or the Boston Red Sox? The Boston Red Sox. What was the name of the French colonial war that ended with the 1954 Geneva Conference? Dien Bien Phu War, Tonkin Crisis, or the First Indochina War? The First Indochina War. Which small artist painted soup cans in the 1960s? Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, or Jasper Johns? Andy Warhol. Which U.S. president served hot dogs to King George VI? Theodore Roosevelt, Harry Truman, or Franklin D. Roosevelt? Franklin D. Roosevelt. What was the name of the cat that sailed with the HMS Amethyst and was awarded a medal? Simon, Oscar, or Smokey? Simon. Which Olympics introduced the torch relay? Berlin 1936, Paris 1924, or Tokyo 1964? Berlin 1936. Which U.S. president was involved in ping-pong diplomacy with China? Gerald Ford, Harry Truman, or Richard Nixon? Richard Nixon. What was the name of the actress who died by drowning off the coast of Catalina Island in 1981? Sharon Tate, Natalie Wood, or Grace Kelly? Natalie Wood. Which silent film star's 1921 trial was the first Hollywood celebrity scandal? Rudolph Valentino, Buster Keaton, or Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle? Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Which car model was introduced by Ford in 1927 to replace the Model T? Fairlane, Model A, or Mustang? Model A. Which big band leader's plane disappeared over the English Channel during the 1940s? Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, or Artie Shaw? Glenn Miller. Which country became the first to officially withdraw from the Warsaw Pact? Hungary, Poland, or Albania? Albania. Which Swedish pop group won Eurovision in 1974? ABBA, Bonnie M, or Bucks Fizz? ABBA. Which Chilean president committed suicide in 1973 because of a CIA-backed coup? Juan Perón, Salvador Allende, or Augusto Pinochet? Salvador Allende. Which U.S. president kept an enemies list during his presidency? Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, or Lyndon B. Johnson? Richard Nixon. Bhumibol Adulyadej was the longest reigning monarch of Thailand. How long was his rule? 85, 70, or 67 years? 70 years. Which 1960s weight loss drink was marketed as a meal replacement in a can? Ensure, Nutrican, or Metrical? Metrical. Which Danish architect designed the Sydney Opera House? Jorn Utzon, Bjarke Ingels, or Arne Jacobsen? Jorn Utzon. What 1963 treaty banned nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater? The Treaty of Tlatelolco, the Test Control Treaty, or Limited Test Ban Treaty? Limited Test Ban Treaty. Which American swimmer won 4 gold medals at the 1964 Tokyo Paralympic Games? Don Schollander, Steve Clark, or Sharon Ron? Don Schollander. Which 1930s film by Marx Brothers mocked fascism? The Coconuts, Duck Soup, or Animal Crackers? Duck Soup. What unusual item did milk cartons begin to include in the 1980s to help the public? Community event notices, recipes, or photos of missing children? Photos of missing children. In which city did the world's first revolving restaurant open? Tokyo, Japan, Dortmund, Germany, or Seattle, USA? Dortmund, Germany. Which U.S. president installed a button on his desk to order drinks? Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, or John F. Kennedy? Lyndon B. Johnson. Which French town's population experienced mass poisoning in the 1950s? Lille, Rouen, or Point Saint-Esprit? Point Saint-Esprit. Which 1970s commuter model had a cassette tape drive as its main storage unit? The Commodore PET or PET, Apple II, or the IBM PC? The Commodore PET. Which country's farmer painted stripes on cows during World War II to prevent nighttime road accidents? Ireland, Great Britain, or Germany? Great Britain. In 1937, the world's first shopping cart was introduced in which U.S. city? Oklahoma, San Diego, or Buffalo? Oklahoma. Which brand created the first inflatable boat? Coleman, Zodiac, or Intex? Zodiac. In 1965, the Soviet Union first sent a human into space. What was the name of the cosmonaut? Yuri Gagarin, Alexander Balandin, or Alexei Leonov? Alexei Leonov. Which 1970s movie featured a high-speed car chase through the streets of San Francisco? Vanishing Point, Gone in 60 Seconds, or Bullet? Bullet. Who was the first woman to serve as the U.S. Secretary of State? Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, or Hillary Clinton? Madeleine Albright. Which movie was the first to gross over $1 billion worldwide? Jurassic Park, Star Wars, or Titanic? Titanic. In what year was Hitler appointed as the Chancellor of Germany? 1935, 1933, or 1931? 1933. What breed was Smokey the dog that served alongside Allied forces in World War II? A Yorkshire Terrier, a German Shepherd, or a Beagle? A Yorkshire Terrier. Which 1930s animated character was one of the first female cartoon stars? Olive Oil, Betty Boop, or Minnie Mouse? Betty Boop. What was the main product made at the Studebaker factory before it began manufacturing cars? Wagons, trains, or clocks? Wagons. Which Dutch dancer was executed for espionage during World War I? Josephine Baker, Isadora Duncan, or Mata Hari? Mata Hari. What was the name of the world's first programmable and fully automatic computer? The ENIAC, Colossus, or Z3? Z3. Which Cold War U.S. military plan aimed to detonate a nuclear device on the moon? Operation Lunar, Project A-119, or the Apollo Strike? Project A-119. Which dessert became a national sensation in the U.S. after being showcased at the 1962 World's Fair? Belgian waffles, red velvet cake, or apple cobbler? Belgian waffles. Which 1960s spy series had a malfunctioning cone of silence? Callan, I Spy, or Get Smart? Get Smart. Which popular American candy introduced a mystery flavor in 1993? Airheads, Tootsie Rolls, or Milk Duds? Airheads. Which 1960s TV sitcom showed an astronaut living with a genie? Gilligan's Island, Bewitched, or I Dream of Jeannie? I Dream of Jeannie. Which international beauty contest faced protests in the 1970s for being sexist? Miss Universe, Miss America, or Miss World? Miss World. Which country had the Cod War with Britain over fishing rights between the 50s and 70s? Iceland, Norway, or Denmark? Iceland. In which U.S. city was the world's first McDonald's franchise by Ray Kroc opened? Des Plaines, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, or Chicago, Illinois? Des Plaines, Illinois. Which 1930s gangster was called Public Enemy Number 1 by the U.S. Attorney General? John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, or Babyface Nelson? John Dillinger. Which European country legalized divorce for the first time in 1970? Spain, Ireland, or Italy? Italy. Which European castle was the inspiration for Disney's Cinderella Castle? The Chateau de Chambord, the Neuschwanstein Castle, or the Edinburgh Castle? The Neuschwanstein Castle. Which 1930s film was the first to use 3-strip Technicolor for outdoor sequences? The Thin Man, King Kong, or Becky Sharp? Becky Sharp. Which early Hollywood star was known as the It Girl in the 1920s? Clara Bow, Gloria Swanson, or Greta Garbo? Clara Bow. Which cold dessert treat was first sold at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904? Ice cream cone, popsicle, or frozen yogurt? Ice cream cone. And for our bonus question, the British physicist known for his work in black holes was who? Let us know the answer in the comments, as well as how you ranked with our quiz class Einstein reward. If you enjoyed this quiz, please hit that like button and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.